Mr. Boll here. This is our Year 3 Geography unit. This is our new topic, all about the climate. Why is the climate important? Well, you've heard of climate change. We're going to investigate in this lesson all about what the climate is. So what is the weather? What's the difference between the weather and the climate? We'll be looking at that today. And what is a biome? And what's the biome like that we live in? And what other biomes are there in the world that are different? So today's learning objective, by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to identify all the climate zones of the world and describe their main features. Now, to start with, we're going to just look at the weather. So here I'm looking at the BBC's weather forecast, and it'll come up, there we go, with a map of Britain. And I'm going to type in where we live. You could do this at home as well if you want to. And I'm going to look for the weather forecast for the Borden area. Hopefully it'll come up in a minute. Here we are. So here's all the information. We get some detail. You can see here, this tells us what is the level of cloud. This number is the number of degrees centigrade. So 10 degrees, yeah, that's all right. Today is a bit nicer than that. It's a bit higher, 14. It says, sorry, that's tomorrow, 14 degrees tomorrow. And on Sunday, 17 degrees. Now, this is very unusual. If you ask your parents, they'll tell you that normally on a Sunday it rains. So today's forecast for Sunday is brilliant. Now this is the forecast for our area, the southeast of England, in the spring. So I want you to just take a few seconds to consider what your ideas are, and you can just say them out loud, for what the difference would be for the forecast for our area, for Borden, in the winter, and what the difference would be, likely differences for the summer. So just think about that for a few seconds. Okay, now what you were probably thinking is, in the summer, you might see some more days like this, instead of having more days like that in the winter with rain. Now in January and February that we've just had, this was like this nearly every day, and sometimes it had 2 drops and said it was really heavy rain every day. You probably remember it. And in the summer, this number might be higher on some days. You might get up into the high 20s, 27, 28. Sometimes in Britain we get over 30 in the summer, but not very often. That's because Britain, we live, our climate for the whole year, which is different, this is the weather for a few days, but our climate for the whole year is somewhere in the middle. It's not really, really hot. It's not really, really cold. It's in the middle, and we call that a temperate climate. And that's a word we're going to be using today. Now back to the slides. So, we've seen the weather, and we're now going to talk about the climate. Now, Britain's just hiding up there. There we are. And our area is a temperate climate. And these other countries near to us, France, Germany, Italy, they have a temperate climate as well. In a temperate climate, you get deciduous trees. So if you look out of your window, the sort of trees you would see, or if you take the dog for a walk, you get trees like oak, beech, birch. These are all deciduous trees. And that means that they drop their leaves in the winter. And that's a lot, that connects with our type of temperate climate. And you'd get the animals that live in that climate that's suited. So you get squirrels and foxes and deer and badgers and all the things that we're used to. But if you went to a different part of the world, let's say this area here, near the equator, then you wouldn't find the same type of animals and plants that we have. So that's really what this lesson is about today, is looking at the different climate zones of the world. Right, now is a challenge for you. And there's 2 different ways you can do this. You can either print this sheet off the website, but I don't want you to worry if the printer's not working or run out of ink or anything. Just put 2 columns in your book or on a piece of paper, and for these 2, the lines, where do the lines go? These are all the words that go in there. And what are the climate zones? And these are the choices. So you can make for yourself 2 columns on a piece of paper. When I finish speaking, you're going to pause this video and you're going to try and fill all these in correctly. Okay, now I'll give you a clue. This line points to, where do you think that's pointing to? Yep, you're right. It's this one, the North Pole. So that's what you're going to be filling in on this side. And then these climate zones, some of these are going to be in here more than once. Let's do an example. The polar climate zone, that goes here because that's at the top alongside the North Pole. But where else do you think it goes? That's right, it also goes in down here because that's the same type of climate that exists down here at the South Pole, the Antarctic. So I'm sure you know what type of conditions you get there. Very cold all year round. In winter, the sun doesn't come up at all. And so that's a polar climate zone, totally different to ours. The creatures that only certain type of creatures can live there. At the North Pole, you get polar bears. I'm sure you know about them. But the type of creatures totally different to a temperate zone, which is where we live. So you're going to have a go, pause the video, try and get all these words in the right place. And the first time you do it, use a pencil in case you make a mistake, and then later you can change it in pen, and you're going to then send me a photograph. So this is one of the bits of work that you're going to send me when you're finished. So take your time, pause the video, have a go at that. Okay, ready to move on. Now we're going to talk about what goes into these boxes. So here's the first one, the North Pole, which you knew. And then the next one is the Arctic Circle. Now, this line is an imaginary line. And people use this. This is a system that we use to divide up the world into different areas so that we can say where they are. And this is a line of latitude. Okay, so lines of latitude go across the world. Okay, and we'll be finding out more about them in another lesson. So lines of latitude go across, but this one we use to show where the edge is of the tropical region. So the one in the northern hemisphere, that's this area above the equator. The one in the northern hemisphere is the Tropic of Cancer. Then you've got this line. What's this line called? Yes, you're right, it's the equator. And then we have the southern edge of the tropical area is called the Tropic of Capricorn, and that's a line that goes all the way around the world here. Then we've got the Antarctic, and finally the South Pole. Now, the climate zones. Well, I gave you that one, so I'm sure you got that one. The one at the top is the polar climate zone. Then you've got the temperate zone, which is like we live in. We live in a temperate zone. Then subtropical, tropical, equatorial, and that equatorial is very hot, very wet. So if you're in that area, the place that you will have heard about that's equatorial is the Amazon rainforest. That's an equatorial type of climate. Then going down again, now we're in the southern hemisphere, the tropical zone, subtropical, then temperate again. Now there's not that much land in the southern hemisphere that's temperate because of the nature of the continents, but an area that you will know about, New Zealand, that's another temperate zone, a bit like Britain. And then finally back to the polar zone, which is the South Pole. So if you made a few mistakes, you can pause the video again and change it and put it in pen. Right, these zones link to the average air temperatures. Here we can see near to the equator, very, very hot. Average temperatures in some areas up to 30-35 degrees centigrade, which for us in Britain, that would be a very hot summer's day. Then as you go north from the equator, this is more like temperate region, like where we are. Here's Britain, in more of a yellow region. So the other regions that have that same type of average, they're going to be temperate zones as well and have similar type of plants and animals to what we have. And finally it gets colder, and then at the poles, really cold, freezing. Okay, climate zones. Now, here's a map of the world showing climate zones. And so here you can see, again, going across the whole world near the equator, that's the tropical zone. And so with the right conditions, you could have a rainforest, like the massive rainforest which is here in Brazil. Okay, and then when you go either south of there, or north of there, you're in the subtropical zone. And some areas in the subtropical zone, like Spain, here on the coast, so you might have been there for a holiday, and you'll think it's a lot hotter here than it is in Britain in the summer, and that's one of the reasons why people like going there. Then you've got the temperate zone, and it's not just in the northern hemisphere that we have a temperate zone, like Britain. You actually can find it down here as well in New Zealand, and this bit is a bit of Australia called Tasmania, and they're a little bit down here, the bottom of South America. And then finally, you've got polar and subpolar zone. As you can see, includes a massive area. A lot of this land is in Russia. Now, it's not quite as simple as the previous map when you add in things like how high the land is, whether there's lots of mountains, whether it's near the sea, and which way the prevailing wind blows. And so then you can break the world up into these different areas. Now these, I've just made this a little bit of a challenge for you. I've covered up the colours on the key here and here. And I've been very kind and left those there for you to see. So obviously this one, the white one, that's the polar area. So there it is. And then it occurs again up here in the northern part of the world. But what colours do you think these are? So you've got 6 to try and work out. Pause the video, give yourself, you don't have to write it down, but just see if you can work them all out. Okay, you've had to go at working them out. So now we're going to remove the boxes. Okay, and then you can see, there we go, tropical forest. There's where, I'm sure you got this one because that is Brazil. Okay, and then you'll notice that not all of this latitude is tropical forest, because this is a line of very high mountains called the Andes, which goes right the way down the middle of South America. And so you don't get tropical rainforest all the way across. But when you come across here to Africa, there's some areas that are also tropical rainforest, and here, Indonesia, etc. So I'm sure you will have got this one, the desert. Here it is, very, very hot, very dry as well. And then the same conditions here in the southern hemisphere in Australia. Right, let's remove this box now. Temperate areas are the darker green. So I think you will have got that one because here's Britain and we live in a temperate area. Coniferous forest, well, what does that mean? A deciduous forest is where the trees drop their leaves in the winter, like most of the trees do in Britain. Coniferous means like pines. Okay, like you see if you go around for a walk around Alice Holt, you'll see conifers. And they're the type of trees that grow naturally, because in Alice Holt they've been planted there, but they grow naturally over this massive area here, this coniferous forest. Okay, and you find that in other parts of the world as well. And they don't drop their leaves in winter, they have needles. And then finally, this one, tundra. And the tundra, the polar regions, is what we'll be looking at in more detail next week, in next week's lesson, week 2. Now, these areas, we call these biomes. Okay, so this is a new word, a biome. What does it mean? It's an area of the world that has a particular climate, and it will have plants and animals that are suited to the climate. So like we said earlier, you might find beech trees and oak trees in Britain, and you probably find squirrels, and you find deer, foxes. Those are the sort of creatures that are suited to a biome that's has a temperate climate. But if you went to the desert, that wouldn't be suited at all. And so you wouldn't find beech trees. You might find cactuses, or cacti, I should say. Cacti are brilliant at conserving water. Okay, and so they can live in desert conditions much better than a beech tree. So a biome is a word that we use to describe a different habitat around the world. And these are some of the different habitats. Okay, now here in this section is going to be another challenge for you to do, and you're going to later on send me your notes. So this is how it works. This is number 1, and you're going to write down on a piece of paper where you think it is, in which type of region. Okay, so you haven't got to give me a country. So you're going to say, so don't write down something like, oh, it's definitely Turkey. And I'll give you a clue, it's not Turkey. But write down the type of region you think it is. Okay, and then say, why do you think so? So just a couple of notes on a piece of paper, and later you can photograph it and send it to me. Okay, so this is the first challenge. What type of region is it, and why do you think so? So for each of these slides, just pause the video if I'm going too fast, write down your notes, and then carry on with the video. Here's the next one, number 2. I've put a little clue in this picture to help you. Okay, this is number 3. And look at your notes that you made earlier to remind yourself the different types of climate zone that we have in the world. So we've got tropical, subtropical, temperate, polar. Now here's the next one. Let's have a look here in the distance. I'll give you a little bit of a clue. This one. Okay, back to the beginning. So if that went too fast, just pause or rewind a little bit and go back over them. Make sure you've got notes down for each one. What region, what type of region do you think it is? What climate zone? And why do you think so? Okay, now I'm interested to hear your views and see what you've worked out, what you've guessed. Right, this one. Well, it wasn't Turkey. So this one is the polar zone. It's actually the Antarctic. Now, you might not have got that, and I don't mind. You might have said it's either the North or the South Pole, but there is a clue, which possibly you didn't know, but actually there's land underneath the snow and ice at the Antarctic, whereas in the Arctic Circle, it's just ice. What about this one? See the clue I put in here? There's a watering can. Now, why would you need one of them? So it can't be the equatorial zone, can it, where it rains a lot, like it does in the Brazilian rainforest. So it must be one of the other types. Well done if you got that it's a subtropical zone. These are banana trees. It's very dry, and in subtropical zones, unlike the equatorial rainforest, you have a dry season as well. And this is in Africa, in the Gambia. So at that time of year, yeah, plants have to be watered. What about this one? Again, subtropical. This is also in the Gambia, and it's again in the dry season. And then here, these are palm oil trees. So they'll be used to provide palm oil. Doesn't look quite so warm there. This lady is very well wrapped up. Okay, so and then here were the clues over here. Some big mountains in the distance with loads and loads of snow on them. So this is on an island off the coast of South America called South Georgia. And this is in the polar zone. Another word which we're going to use a bit more next week is tundra. And they have their winter in August. July and August is their winter, because in the southern hemisphere it's the other way around to here, as you know. They have their summer, December and January. And so their temperature in the summer only gets up to about 8 degrees, which for us, we would think, oh dear, that's really cold. Right, what about this one? This one is in the tropical climate zone, and these plantations are trees called a cardamom. This is in Sri Lanka. This is the type of climate it likes, between 18 and 35 degrees, and very humid, which means there's lots of moisture in the atmosphere. So they wouldn't grow well in Britain. It's not humid enough for them here, and it's also too cold. This one is subtropical, and like we said earlier, you get a wet and a dry season in the subtropical regions, and this is their dry season. Now this one, I expect you got this, subtropical. It's a tea plantation in India, and it also needs a wet and a dry season. But the difference between this and an equatorial area is it hasn't got the giant trees that cover everything. And you need, that's a bit of a giveaway, isn't it? You need for that hot and wet all year round, like this picture of the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. Okay, well done everybody. Just a reminder, this is what we're doing today, identifying the climate zones of the world. And this is what you're going to send me, your sheet that you filled in that looks like that one. And then I want you to also send me a sheet of your notes where you've had a guess at what all these regions are using the phrases that we've learned today, like subtropical. Okay, once you've done that, take a photograph, get your parents to send it to me on my school email. That'll be brilliant. And thanks for all your history work on the Egyptians, which has been fantastic. So well done, and look forward to seeing what you show me on your geography. All the best then. Bye now.